Think of your favorite song. Now, think of your favorite part of the song. It can be the chorus or the bridge. From there, pick your favorite part of the part. One guitar lick or a lyric. Divide it again. Divide that infinitesimally. In the music of the universe, we tiny humans are even smaller. So non-existent, our note cannot even be heard. But that's okay. Here, we challenge you to put your life into the perspective of the universe. It's scary, right? But the more we approach scary ideas with an air of acceptance and curiosity, the less scary the world and the universe and the people around us become. So sit back, relax. Each episode, we tell you a big story of a time where science made humans feel small. In turn, small sometimes made people around these scientists feel scared and lash out. But, hopefully, if we keep looking at these moments in history, like Galileo in the center of the universe, or Alan L. Hart, the trans scientist who stopped the tuberculosis pandemic, we can learn to accept our feelings of small and wonder at them instead of feeling scared. Or, if you prefer to sit back and meditate to the cosmic music, you may do that too. I hear science says that will make you live 23% longer. With that, sit back, open your mind. We hope you find that any feelings of small are not scary. Welcome to Small Anthropoids. How do you catch an elephant? Someone very special in our lives once asked us.
With lots of tape? We'd pondered.
Close, this person chuckled. He said very seriously. First, you dig a big pit. Super big. You pick up the heavy pail of ash from last night's fire. Listen carefully. You surround the edge of the pit with the ash. Don't miss even the tiniest bit of soil. Very important. It must all be ash. Then, find the biggest peanut, toss it right into the middle of the pit. Then, when the elephant leans down to grab the peanut, you kick it in the ash hole.
This was one of the earliest jokes Grandpa told us when we were little.
That's more elite than what he told me. It was always just, I got your nose.
And it worked on you every time.
I still can't find my nose.
Grandpa was always brimming with humor, lying silently in wait at the back of the room, only to pounce with a zinger of a joke, take everyone down laughing, then settle back comfortably at his favorite spot at the edge of the conversation.
Lying silently in wait before pouncing in with a joke was an art, and one Grandpa had perfected to a T. What I didn't know until much later, however, was that his quiet, gentle jokester soul full of surprises was one of the leading field-specific scientists of his time.
He passed away on Earth Day, April 2022. Our grandma loved him very much. If there was a real-life couple from the Pixar film Up, it would have been them. Since his passing, our grandma has often kept track of the questions she would ask him if she could. Questions about his work, about science.
Even though they had 58 years together, we will always have more questions. We thought today, on their 61st wedding anniversary, as a gift to her, we would try to answer as many of these questions as we can. Not through my dad, exactly, but through the next best thing, his research papers.
After 3 months of sifting through his piles of research papers online, I feel somehow stupider than when I began, but armed with this new information, we will do our best to answer these questions as if he were here. I'm Abby.
I'm the glorious sister, Bethany.
And I'm Dad, Steve, joining today's podcast about my dad, Ed. Hey Mom, I'm on a podcast.
With that, let's dive in.
Question 1. Who was Grandpa Ed? Edward, or E.H. Vidruck, as he went by on his research papers, was born in Winnipeg, Canada in 1939. He was the youngest of 3. The oldest, his brother Casimir, has a Wikipedia page for being the first Lithuanian football player, and an annual memorial award named after him for exceptional linemen in the Winnipeg High School Football League. The middle child, Virginia, I am told was full of life and humor, and a force to be reckoned with, and that I ought to have met her.
Ed's parents, my grandparents, Mary and Michael, emigrated from Lithuania to Canada in 1928. They changed their last name from Vidrukas to Vidruck to fit in. Michael, and Mary behind the scenes, began the first Lithuanian Sons and Daughters Mutual Aid Society in Winnipeg, which was beginning to flourish with a population of Lithuanian immigrants at that time.
I distinctly remember Grandpa talking about the tension growing up with a Lithuanian-speaking immigrant family in an English-speaking Canadian city. On the bus, when his family would speak Lithuanian, my grandpa as a teenager would pretend not to know them out of fear and embarrassment in front of his peers. I think he regretted doing that when he told me that story. It was brave of him to tell it. You'll see this bravery in telling the whole truth as a common theme in Ed's story through science.
What did Ed do in science exactly? Well, my dad, Steve, jokingly says he was a career student.
He was. I'm pretty sure Mom had to drag him by the ear out of his science lab to walk across the stage at any of his graduations or for earning any of his accolades.
Ed never stopped learning. Even as a seasoned man a bit past his Optimus Prime, his tech skills rivaled millennials and Gen Zers. He very smartly bought stock in a young Netflix, and later bought our music teacher Grandma Jan at 80 years old her long-awaited grand piano. I call it the Netflix piano. Thank you, Netflix, for the piano.
But in science, Ed was, in the words of UW-Madison, a neurophysiologist, which he used in a postdoctoral fellowship at the Cardiovascular Research Institute in San Francisco, followed by a 25-year stint as an NIH-funded, tenured professor in the Department of Population Health Sciences. His pride and joy was being an integral member of the Rankin Laboratory of Pulmonary Medicine, where he researched the plasticity of neural networks controlling breathing, the effects of sleep states on the neural control of breathing, and the nervous innervation of airway smooth muscle.
That's all a fancy way of saying when you intermittently stop breathing at night, which is no bueno, the brain just lets it happen. So one of Ed's questions was, why does the brain think it's sexy to stop breathing?
Hey!
You gotta make this PG for Dad. I don't think our parent feels guided.
I mean sleep apnea and why the brain thinks it's saucy.
Better.
More specifically, when someone stops breathing at night, why doesn't the brain intervene? What happens with its neurons?
Stop joking. Tell him your name.
My name? What's his name? What's his name? I got nothing on a name. Come on, baby, what's the name? We threw out his name!
That's more like it.
Steve loves his SpongeBob.
A+ parental guidance.
Thank you.
Ed worked with Dr. John Oram and his wife Becky in Texas to answer this question. Together, they endeavored to find how it happens that the respiratory oscillator in the brainstem stops when someone stops breathing.
In a coconut shell, our breathing is controlled by mysterious rhythmic neural activity generated in the brainstem. Waves of neurons more numerous than the stars in the visible sky charge and recede like waves on a beach with each breath we take. The neurons create this pattern on their own even while we sleep, without us having to consciously think, hey, take a breath.
It makes sense that the brainstem allows us to breathe on autopilot. That's a pilot pun, Mom! But the question is, what do these neurons do when something like sleep apnea interrupts their flow?
To answer this, Ed and John turned to cats and rabbits. Now you might be thinking, hey, this channel with animals is like a golden retriever with a ball. Obsessed. So how can you do an episode about animal experimentation?
The truth is, well, it's the truth. While laws and attitudes have shifted since the 70s and even the 90s and early 2000s, animals are still used in scientific experimentation today, for better and for worse. Like Grandpa's brutal truth story at the beginning, about stepping away from his Lithuanian-speaking family in public, this story is also one that perhaps doesn't paint him in the best light, but it's the truth about what happened, and I don't think he'd change how it happened. I believe he'd want me to portray the story about animal experimentation in the same fashion, with nothing but the simple facts, and for you to take away your own conclusions. With that, we'll continue the story.
With approval by the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee of Texas Tech University School of Medicine and the National Institute of Health, and a dedicated member on staff to perform good husbandry and care for the animals, John and Ed got to work. they surgically implanted electrodes into the brains of cats and rabbits to record respiratory neurons during periods of mechanically induced sleep apnea.
That brings us to the next question. With this experiment, what did they find? Well, they don't know.
The brain didn't respond in any sort of pattern. Astonishingly, when breathing stopped intermittently, the neuron activity didn't cease with it every time, or start with it every time. It just did its own thing.
When John and Ed couldn't find a predictable pattern between the breathing neurons and, well, breathing, they instead began looking at the influence of sleep stages on breathing.
What are the different stages of sleep? In a nutshell, there are 4 stages. Non-REM 1 is light sleep. Non-REM 2 is moderate sleep. Non-REM 3 is deep, restorative sleep, where memories are stored. The last one is REM, or rapid eye movement. This is where dreams take place.
Prior research before them suggests that with each shift in sleep stage is a shift in breathing, like a sigh or a long breath. Perhaps this is why slow breathing, scientifically, forces the brain into relaxation, and why people who meditate, according to the American Journal of Cardiology, are 23% less likely to die, 30% less likely to die from cardiovascular disease, and 49% less likely to die from cancer than the control group. There are consistent, tangible results found in the relationship between breathing, sleep, and human lifespan, and no one quite knows why.
In relationship to Dad's experiment, they found that when REM sleep began in these cats and rabbits, something else began with it. A quote from one of their papers, "A mysterious excitation that runs through the neurons of the brain, causing them to discharge in generally undecipherable patterns." End quote. Is this mysterious something the result of sleep apnea, dreams, or something our brains can't quite comprehend about themselves yet? We don't know, and Dad and John, despite making it their life's work, never found out either.
Grandpa retired in 2005 at age 66. His 4th grandchild,
Me!
had just been born. On our side of the family, he lived to attend my graduation, my brother's virtual COVID graduation, and avidly followed Bethany's golf scores online, attending every band event. He played a mean Wordle game, and when the concerned nurses asked after his slow response to the question, "How long have you been slow?" he simply replied, "Birth."
Members of PETA broke into and vandalized the laboratory John and Ed worked. Did they feel scared at the unnatural contraptions sticking out of the animals' scalps? Contraptions that the scientists argued were painless, humane, and that the animals were adapted to? Could they understand the magnitude of the work being done for the betterment of humankind, and for the sake of sheer science? Or is the experimentation on animals ever condoned, even in human benefiting circumstances? The scientists and university found it justified, and so it happened. PETA found it unjustified, and so the vandalism happened as well. For better or worse, that is the truth.
But what might Ed and John have found if they had had more time? What if they had more resources, or human studies, or been in the right place at the right time with the right technology? Unfortunately, we still don't know what it was they found happening in the respiratory neurons in sleep apnea and in REM sleep. The reality in science is, less than 1% of scientists are remembered in history.
99% of the scientists who have ever lived, they will likely remain a footnote, if documented at all, the stepping stone on which the future Einstein or Curie will use to make their world-changing discovery. Dad is one of those stepping stones. Although he wasn't able to find the final answer to some of his lifelong questions, we do know he was as humble as they come. He would be happy sitting in the corner of scientific history, waiting to pounce with the perfect joke, or in his case, a tiny sliver of data, only to retake his comfortable spot in the back of the conversation, quietly enjoying the company of other great minds.
That's our show. Hopefully that answers some of your questions. If you have more questions for Ed, post them below and we will do our best to answer.
Stay curious, stay hopeful.
Hi, Mom. Still on a podcast.
Happy 61st anniversary.
Take care, small anthropoids.